Mayoral Memo with Mathew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
From Dubbo Regional Council, Mayor Mathew Dickerson. Good morning.
Good morning, Rod. Great to be chatting to you.
Lots of things to talk about in regards to Dubbo. One is a bunch of young people coming and visiting with other people, of course, for the New South Wales Touch Junior State Cup a couple of weeks ago. How'd that go?
Well, the great thing that you mentioned there, Rod, is that a bunch of young people, but young people aren't old enough to drive and can't stay in motels by themselves. So, of course, they have to bring their parents, carers, friends of parents, grandparents, a whole range of people. So we ended up with, we estimate, around 8,500 people in Dubbo for the Junior State Cup. Fantastic event. It all went very well. They were incredibly impressed with not just our grounds and the quality of our grounds, but just the attitude from everyone they came across, the friendly attitude, the helpful attitude from everyone. And one thing that really worked well for them was we had it in an area called Lady Cutler Ovals. And so we converted a range of ovals there that are sometimes used for soccer, sometimes used for cricket, and put them all into touch footy ovals. But there were 30 ovals there in one group together. So I went around and spoke to a number of participants, parents, coaches, etc., and they loved the idea that the whole perimeter of that was closed off to cars, so kids could just walk from ground to ground, be safe in that area, know that everything was in one area. And some of these parents had multiple kids competing, so it'd be walking over to one ground, watch one of their kids walk across to another ground. And I must say that New South Wales Touch Football Association ran a very tight ship. So I was actually very impressed with how well they ran the tournament. Dubbo Touch Association were very involved as well. They did a great job. But even things that we took care of with the Touch Association, where, for example, at the end of the day, we would just go around and help clean up. And New South Wales Touch was just, wow, this doesn't happen at other places. So we've got to put in a bid before the end of April. They should make the decision about where to go for the next 3 years. We'll certainly be putting in a bid. And hopefully on the back of the great success of this tournament, we estimate $4 million was injected into our economy. We'd love to see that come back for the next 3 years.
Yep, good idea for that. Why is the Dubbo Regional Council looking at moving the council chambers?
That's a very good question, Rod, and it all comes down to economics. We've currently got our chambers, our area where we have our council meetings. It's probably 150 square metres of office space, but it's used twice a month. It might be used for half an hour to an hour for a committee meetings once a month, and maybe 2 or 3 hours for a council meeting once a month, and that's it. And that might have been okay back in the 70s when that building was first opened and we had this beautiful council chamber area. But the reality is, in today's society, we are just so focused on making sure the economics of council stack up and really trying to squeeze everything we can. We believe if we take those chambers and move them to our conference rooms, where we can reconfigure those conference rooms twice a month for our meetings, our committee meetings and council meetings, then we've freed up that office space. We've actually got a building just across the road from the main council admin building where we've got staff in there at the moment because it was bulging at the seams. And if we move those staff over into the main building, for example, we could then sell off that building. It's been valued at maybe $700,000 or $800,000, or we could lease it out and get a return on that. We think that's better from an economics point of view. And with our conference rooms, they're downstairs as well. So not only are they used for conferences all day, every day, and then reconfigured, but from a accessibility perspective, if you're in a wheelchair, for example, if you find it a bit hard to walk, they're on the ground floor, and that's much easier to get into rather than going up lifts and downstairs lifts to get into the council chambers where they are currently upstairs. So it stacks up for a whole range of reasons. Some former councillors have expressed disappointment about the loss of history that will occur when we move in there, and I understand that. There's been some important decisions that have been made in those council chambers. But again, I myself, and I know other councillors, are very focused on making sure we get a financially viable and sustainable council, and this seems like one of those steps to do to actually achieve that.
Sort of sometimes get disappointed at people not wanting to see things advance. I'm not one for change, it's for just for change's sake, but this seems like a very positive move.
Well, it's again, I do understand the history side of it, but I also understand that we want to take the financial situation of council and make it better. And this is one of the many ways. And you might think about it and say, well, it's in the whole scheme of things, it's only a small amount of space or it's only a small amount of money, but it's all those little things that add up to a significant cost and a significant outcome. So you've got to look for savings everywhere you can. And when we're asking our staff to make sure we're doing everything we can financially, it seems a bit precious for councillors to say we want to reserve this little spot just for us, but everywhere else make sure you do things as efficiently as possible. We've got to lead that charge.
All right, I will leave it there. Fire, you went off to the sort of like control centre.
Yeah, the control centre out at the airport for the Rural Fire Service. Obviously, we had 2 fires in Dubbo over the last couple of weeks. We had the Cranbrook fire and the fire near Burrendong Dam, and that was a hive of activity, and the Rural Fire Service invited me out to have a look. Now, council sits on the emergency committee, and there's a number of agencies depending on the emergency. So, for example, in the floods last year, that emergency committee was a slightly different makeup to what it is in fires. Council is really there as a participant. We're not leading the way there, but we obviously offer resources where we can. So some of our graders we use, for example, to try and make a fire break at the Burrendong fire. And again, we've got our resources there to offer to whatever agency, whatever emergency agency needs them. But I was incredibly impressed with 2 things when I had the visit to the control room, Rod. The first thing was just the number of people in there, very calm, very professional, doing their job, and they knew what they were doing. Everyone in that room was busy, not panicked, not tense, but just busy, but all knew exactly what they were doing and all going about their job in a very busy way. The second thing I love was the technology there. And you've got these huge screens on the wall, they're touch screens, they can change the view from, for example, aerial view of the hotspots, where the actual hotspots are, or weather views to show what the wind is doing at various spots, or just a view of all the assets on the fireground. So the various the various vehicles that the Rural Fire Service has, where they are all situated. So with that communication between people on the firegrounds themselves and people in the control room, I think you're getting the best of both worlds to really get the best information there. And then you tie in some of that information back to the RJ85, which is the large aerial tanker, so they can direct where they drop that retardant to try and stop the fire progressing. So I think we're in pretty safe hands whenever we have an emergency, and a fire is one of those emergencies. Whenever we have an emergency, I think we're in pretty safe hands with those people who really know what they're doing and using technology in the best possible way.
All right, and how's the Northwest precinct going?
A very exciting area. Sometime in the future, maybe in the next 2 decades, we'll see 6,000 blocks of land developed there. At the moment, it's an old paddock. Some part of it used to be used for an old sewage treatment plant there. There's a whole range of farming area there, but that'll all convert into blocks of land. Now, the exciting opportunity is, because it's blank, we can do a complete structure plan for that whole area. Council owns some of that land, but there's a number of other developers involved that own different parcels of land in there as well. The job at the moment is to create an overall structure plan that's going to make that area an exciting new area, only 1.5 kilometres from the CBD of Dubbo, so you don't often get opportunities to develop areas that close to the CBD, and really create an area that's got great amenity, that's got a variety of housing density, and still gives a reasonable yield, so developers still want to develop it and make some money out of it. So that's the planning we're doing at the moment, and when I look at some of those initial structure plans, I get pretty excited about that whole area and what that means for the future of Dubbo. The first house will be built on that probably by about the year 2025, so we've got a little way to go for the first house, but it'll take a long time before that's completely filled out.
A good number of new residences for Dubbo.
Absolutely right, and they will come from a whole range of areas. They'll come from sometimes people out further west who then retire and move into Dubbo, but we actually really try and get more people from Sydney, from some of those metropolitan areas, who suddenly one day wake up and realise that an hour commute to work on a $1 million price tag for a house is not the dream, and come out to a regional area like Dubbo where you've got a much shorter commute and much cheaper housing to choose from. So some people finally wake up and go, you know what, this isn't the dream is in Dubbo.
The dream's in Dubbo. Not wiser words ever said. How about your renewable energy zone, how that's going?
Yeah, that's going really well, and that's another exciting area that'll really keep our economy ticking away for the next decade for all that construction work. One of the important things, though, is that the renewable energy zone, this is the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone, goes across 3 council areas. Mid-Western Regional Council, so what people normally refer to as Mudgee, or Bungle Shire Council, the Coonabarabran area, and of course Dubbo. One of the important things is for the 3 of us to continue to talk about everything that's happening, because we want to make sure that when proponents come along, they don't play off each council against each other. They don't have different rules for each council. So we held another meeting for the 3 of us together just this week, actually, and in that discussion, one of the things that was very important was the planning agreements. There is a compulsory component of a wind farm where the proponents have to pay money to the local community in terms of that planning agreement. But for a solar farm and a battery, you don't need to pay that. So none of these developments go through council. They all go through a state significant development process. But we, in terms of those 3 councils, have put forward a framework where we're saying that we expect 1.5% of the capital cost of that project to be paid to the community over the lifetime, say over the 20 years or 25 years of that particular project. Now, that's a wish from us. We have no authority to enforce that, but we're basically saying to those proponents, if you want to get social licence, if you want to get the community on board, this is a way that you can get the community on board, because we'll be providing so much power for the state out of this area. We only think it's fair and reasonable that the community in this area gets something from those proponents.
All right, and finally this morning, the Wiradjuri Tourism Project is due to start construction by the end of this year.
Still a little way to go, still a bit more consultation to go on that, still some final plans to come up with, but that is a really exciting area there for tourism, or from a tourism perspective. And people come from overseas, people come from metropolitan areas, they come from other states, and they come into an area like Dubbo. We've got 15.6% of our population is Aboriginal, well identified as a significant Wiradjuri area, and people look for some Aboriginal tourism, and unfortunately there's not a lot of that at the moment. So whatever we can do as a council to help with that, there are Aboriginal groups who are also working on different things in tourism as well, but that cultural tourism area I think will be really exciting, good for culture, for some of those Wiradjuri people here, but also good for people visiting to learn more about the Wiradjuri people from this area and really just understand a bit more about it all. And I think that's the way forward, Rod. We talk about all sorts of things. You talk about the voice, you talk about a whole range of different issues and problems that we've had in the past. The way forward, I think, is to just understand where everyone's coming from, and I think that will make for a better country overall.
Spot on there, mate. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Rod. My pleasure.
Mayoral Memo with Mathew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.